relatando tu pasado.
So there is a hobby surrounding custom mechanical keyboards. No, not your run-off-the-mill Corsair Logitech Razor pre-builts, but actual custom boards that you buy the individual parts for and build yourself like you would a PC. And I've been stalking this hobby for quite a while now, lurking around r/mechanical keyboards and joining countless Discord servers, drooling at the beautiful brass and stainless steel art pieces practically that I will never be able to afford, wishing I could someday have a custom I could call my own. And finally, after months of planning, I've done it. I've built a custom keyboard, my first custom keyboard, which isn't even supposed to exist, and we'll get into that later, but right now, let's get into it. If you haven't been looking too deeply at the internet, it may feel so foreign to you and wants me, gaming mechanical keyboard users, to see something like this. To realize that there is so much more past the cherry switches and overpriced plastic cases given to everyone by these mainstream brands. It may even feel daunting at first, stepping into this hobby and just taking a look around, because there is just so much to take in, but I swear to you, you will not regret it. Though your wallet definitely will, it will hate you. At this point, if you're intrigued, I highly suggest watching Mr. Teha Type's introductory video to the hobby, as it hits a lot of important bases and a little extra that might prepare you for the rest of this video. But I've been rambling for far too long. Let's actually get in depth with this thing now, starting with my part choices. I think actually picking parts is the most difficult and most important part of the build itself. So to summarize, the main parts of a keyboard are the case, PCB or printed circuit board, plate, switches, stabilizers, lubricant, keycaps, and a cable. And with this board being my first, the theme was testing things out. For whatever reason, the keyboard gods have been on my side for pretty much my entire time in this hobby. I wanted Cat Milkshake, NK65 Milkshake Edition. I wanted some nice gray and blue keycaps, GMK Modern Dolce Group buy, matching cable group buy, and my Holy Pandas came unlubed and properly packaged. And for this build specifically, the Keyboard God's Grace was a cheap, gray polycarbonate case that would not sell out in 40 seconds. This time, at least. And that case would be the great Novel Key 65% Entry Edition, a polycarbonate board targeted towards beginners and people looking to enter the hobby and have a fretless, enjoyable building experience. Now, I know a guy who knows the owner of Novel Keys, and he said that they barely make any profit from selling these boards, and it makes sense for such a good deal compared to the around $300 average you'll be seeing for high-end group buy boards. For just $95, you're first getting this nice hard carrying case. Now, I personally don't see the practicality of this, but practicality only goes so far in this hobby. Whatever. Of course, you get the keyboard itself, silicone dampening inside the case for better acoustics and less pingy sounds from the switches, a hot swap PCB, an aluminum plate, and stabilizers included, plus a nice coiled cable. And for the board itself, it's a very simple design, very jagged and clean looking. Obviously, it didn't come assembled like it did in that unboxing sequence. So this is a 65% layout, which means no number pad and no function row. On the right side, there are smaller 1U modifiers, the arrow keys, and your choice of 4 secondary modifiers, and I've opted for tilde on the top, page up, page down, and delete. I personally think that 65% strikes a really nice balance as a form factor. It's aesthetically pleasing, unlike 75%, which is admittedly better practicality-wise, still saves space, unlike TKL, and most importantly, gives you arrow keys, which 60% sometimes doesn't. There's 3 status indicators on the top right that show caps lock, function layer 1, and function layer 2, and on the bottom are 2 rubber pads to prevent scratching or movement on your table. If you were a beginner, you would slot in the switches, slot in the keycaps, and that's it. 2 steps and you're done. Takes like 5 or so minutes with no soldering or lubing. But I, however, did not go that route, and that brings us to the next part switches. Since I had already bought tactile Holy Pandas to put in another board, I decided that I wanted to try an enthusiast grade linear switch. And what better switch to go for than the Gateron inks. Originally, I settled on the black ink variant, which was an 80 gram linear, but I had used Razer keyboards before, which were pretty much hair trigger, and I think my weak little fingers would have broken if I hadn't gone the safer route with a lighter weight. So I settled for some 67 gram red inks instead, which only differed from black inks in color and spring weight. These aren't cheap switches, coming in at around 75 cents a piece or $7.50 US for 10, but you gotta do what you gotta do to get that thick thok sound. And for extra smoothness, and to get the full experience of the keyboard hobby, I decided to lube each and every one of the 80 switches I picked up with Krytox 205 Grade 0, a high performance, high price, thick lube that would improve both sound and feel. On top of these now lubed switches would go my keycaps, which, well, these are some cheap temporary caps I got off Amazon until JTK Night Sakura goes live. Their DSA profile, which means all the rows are the same rounded shape, and PBT plastic since I had never tried either of them before, and the more I look at them, the more I like them. Admittedly, they actually do fit this gray polycarbonate really well, and the red accent additionally nicely alludes to the red switches. DSA also adds a really nice looking side profile to the board, in my opinion, since all the heights are uniform. It just looks clean. Obviously, this will be completely different when Night Sakura comes in, as that is a cherry profile set with a completely different color scheme. Just a little background around this keyboard. This keycap set, which hasn't even come out yet, was the main inspiration behind this board. At the time, the MK65 Smoke colorway was new, and my massive brain combined the two in Photoshop, and it resulted in this, which had got me intrigued. Beforehand, I hadn't even noticed how the gray of the set and the polycarbonate color just matched so well, and from that render, I was sold instantly. So let's talk about the experience of building this board. I'm very sorry, but I was so eager to get this board built that I didn't bother actually filming the process since everything arrived within the span of around 3 days. But I think maybe that was for the better, since my verdicts have changed slightly after being able to use this board for a while before writing the script. First off, just as a disclaimer for future videos, I'm avoiding soldering PCBs like the plague. I will hold off on doing that for as long as possible unless there is a really good board that absolutely has no hot swap option. And I think the keyboard gods are taking my side on this too. Hot swap availability is slowly increasing, and people are starting to realize that the benefits definitely outweigh the downsides, being that switches are less secure and whatnot. This build starts with the switches. When they arrived from Divinity, the box was so small that I thought they hadn't given me all 80, but I counted and they were right. They came in this nice thick bag that I wish was more protected because some of the pins were bent. This couldn't be an easier fix though, as you just bend them back. But still, if my Holy Pandas, fulfilled by mass drop, can beat you in any department, you're definitely doing something wrong. Now onto lubing. Since I had already lubed my Holy Pandas with Tribosis 3203, a thinner lube, I had decided that I was experienced enough to use a thick lube this time, which I was told was more difficult to make consistent across switches. I think I've done a pretty good job with consistency, with only 2 or 3 sore thumbs that can easily be fixed thanks to hot swap. Though I did buy a lube station, I ended up realizing that I didn't even need it, as lubing switch housings on the switch opener itself worked just fine. However, it was a nice little added convenience, and I do recommend picking a cheap one up if you're a beginner, just for the extra helping hand. I decided to use the same lubing process that I had used for my Holy Pandas, but this time with a little bit more moderation, as this was a thick lube and I didn't want to apply too much and ruin the feel. After all, less is more. So this meant lubing in batches of 10 switches at a time, first lubing the 2 rails and the center post, then the 2 ends of the spring, and lastly the switch sides, and a tiny amount on the switch post. I know people say it takes a few hours to lube all the switches in one sitting, but honestly it felt shorter. I don't know if it was that I was going too fast, or that I was in a call with some friends, but regardless, if you put a show or video on in the background while you lube, it's honestly pretty relaxing, especially since I was doing it in batches instead of the entirety of a single monotonous part at a time. Going from stock switches to lubed, I could notice a very significant increase in smoothness, though I think this is mainly because I had received a particularly scratchier batch of switches. I had been told that different batches manufactured by Gateron had varying degrees of smoothness, but it should all be fixed with lubing anyway. Here's a comparison between the switches lubed and unlubed. I did get a little scared that this level of smoothness that I had never felt before meant I over-lubed. Maybe I did just a tad, but you can hear it for yourself in the sound test later on. I probably did this in the wrong order, but just to see how it felt, after every batch, I would install the switches and the keycaps. Don't do this like I did. You should first be messing with stabilizers, if not the case in PCB, but I was just too eager. This added on unnecessary time wasting later on. Sadly, I did ruin one switch by putting it in while the pin was bent. I got really scared that the PCB was broken when the key presses were not registering. Please check that the pins are straight before pushing in, and please make sure you're not pushing at an angle. After this, I checked these stabilizers. This was strangely the most difficult part of the entire build process. There aren't many details about them on Novelkey's website, only that they're plate mounted instead of PCB mounted, which meant more rattle. They looked almost exactly like Cherry genuine stabilizers with the black housing and silver wire, but there's no way that this quality is from a Cherry genuine stabilizer. I didn't know that they were already lubed and half clipped, though fully clipping them was the first thing I did. No matter what I tried, they sounded rattly to me. I also had made sure beforehand that the wires were straight, so they weren't a possible source of rattle. It took way too long and I still haven't fixed the issue. This could have been avoided entirely if I had bought my own stabs that were guaranteed to be high quality, but I was not about to wait another 2 weeks or so just to finish this board. I tinkered at my table for maybe an hour or two in total, just on the stabs, testing them, taking them out, modifying them, then testing them again. Each time I tried adding more lube and putting band-aids in different positions, but I seemed to hit a disappointingly low ceiling when my changes stopped making changes. Is this just the quality of plate mount stabilizers? Did I do something wrong? Are the stabilizers just bad? Are my standards just too high? I still don't know as of now, but please, if you make a verdict during the sound test, drop it in the comments below. After the issue with the stabs was fixed, it was time to use the board. I think it sounded a bit over-lubed at first, but as I wore the lube in and it settled, it started sounding better and better. Or maybe that was just me going insane from messing with the stabs every so often, but whatever. If you've noticed throughout the video, there is no lighting whatsoever in the keyboard. There actually is per key RGB, configurable via an app called VIA, where you can change lighting effects, macros, keybinds, and more. I've just decided to keep it off because white becomes red because the switches are red and the keycaps aren't shine through, so it just looks strange. And these are the two main reasons you don't see RGB turned on other customs, even if it's already built into the PCB. But it's totally available in the NK65 if you want to use it, and a neat quirk with the polycarbonate is that it can be seen through the sides and bottom. Something I was worried about turned out to be the steeper typing angle. I had used keyboards with wrist rests and relatively flat typing angles all my life, and was worried that I would be unable to use this board without some sort of wrist fatigue. But after a few weeks of use, it felt fine to me, so if that's a minor gripe you have with a few customs, I can assure you there's a very tiny adjustment period before it feels perfectly normal. And now for the part that you're probably waiting for. How does it sound? wow. Even though it's a tad overlubed and some parts of the stabilizers are still rattly, it's miles ahead of any pre-built keyboard. After a fair bit of experience, I do feel like this is the most optimal sound I can get without further modification. I am getting a bit of what I think is stem wobble when the housings wobble around a bit and make extra clacky noise, but I do think this issue can be fixed with films, which are small polycarbonate pieces that go in between the two switch housings to minimize wobbling. Though there is a very slim chance that I will actually go this route for the board, as I really don't want to reassemble everything. And of course, when the real keycaps are put on, it'll sound slightly different due to the varying material, thickness, and profile. I also find that a desk mat under makes it sound more thocky. Before I move on to the next section, let's talk quickly about VIA, the software used to configure this board. VIA and QMK are basically enthusiast Razer synapse. Through them, you can change lighting, set macros, change keybinds, and set layers. It's slightly more confusing in the macro department because you have to use the command syntax to write out key presses instead of just recording it. Otherwise, it's great. It retains a lot of the functionality of Synapse, which I was worried about at first because there are some macros that I use all the time. You also get the added benefit of setting it once and forgetting about it, since all the changes are saved onto the board itself and hold up when you switch computers, unlike Synapse, where you have to download it on every computer you want to use its features for. So why do people do this? Why do people spend obscene amounts of money and time on something so seemingly ordinary, let alone a household and workplace staple? Well, I'll start by saying this same argument applies to gaming mechanical keyboards. Compared to the standard membrane rubber dome keyboards seen across the globe, they're a lot more expensive, feel better, sound better, and look better. Now take this same argument, amplify it, and apply it to customs. It's essentially taking all the aspects and purchase justifications for gaming mechanical keyboards and fulfilling what they couldn't. And the result is a community of like-minded people and a hobby of building something so truly unique and personal, and knowing that it's something that nobody else will be able to exactly replicate. The result is a market with something for truly everyone, something so customizable that you can customize how much you want to customize. So in short, the reason is for look, sound, and feel. Each can be finely tuned down to the millimeter to your exact specifications, your exact preferences. And this is really a level of customizability unique to us. You can rarely find something outside the hobby that's so accommodating to your needs, and definitely far more than a pre-built with specifications practically set in stone. You want something loud, something quiet, something practical, something niche, something flashy, something minimal? Then say no more. You know, for me personally, I was never intending to get invested into the hobby when I was first introduced to it. And I know that because I don't know that. I don't really remember anything about myself getting introduced to the hobby, which means that I just toss it off as something I would be interested in for a while, then find another hobby in a few months. But I ended up never leaving, because every day there's something new. Go and see for yourself. Listen to others type on their customs online, and with the community's growing presence and increasing availability, why not even try to build one yourself? Even on a budget that's cheaper than high-end gaming keyboards, you can still make a custom that far surpasses them in those three categories, and finally see why we say, once you clack, you can never go back. And once you thock, you can never go balk. Thanks for watching this episode of Near Lucid. If you like this video, drop a thumbs up. If you have feedback or questions, don't hesitate to leave a comment below. We'd be more than happy to answer. Also, these videos take lots of work, and by subscribing, you're letting us know that you want us to keep making them. And if you find my voice annoying, you can always unsubscribe. That's all for this video. See you guys later.